Hello, friends, and welcome to Mothership Gear. We have a great episode lined up for you today. I'm your host, Spencer Alfonso. I'm the creative director and co-owner of Ildefonso Inc. I'm actually a part of a few projects on our label as well, with Riley and the Roxies, the Margots, the TVC. And let me introduce to you our guest. We have my good friend, Brandon Burr, who is a songwriter, producer. He's an artist. He's the creative force behind the band Boosk with Mary Ives and Dan Bailey. And he is also the other half of the Margots with me. And a little bit about this channel. We are Ildefonso Inc. We're a full service sync house and music agency. We host shows like Mothership Gear, and this is a show where we invite musicians to hang at our studio to talk about their favorite or most unique pieces of gear. And the unique piece of gear that we're talking about today is the JMJ bass. So, Brandon, why don't you really quickly just kind of tell us what is the JMJ bass?
Yeah. So this bass is a signature model bass from Fender for Justin Meldal Johnsen. He's a producer, bass player, has played with a ton of people. My favorite stuff that he's done has been with Beck and M83. And yeah, he's just great. So this is a signature bass for him. And what I love about it is there's nothing crazy. It's just a Mustang. It's a replica of his 66.
Right. So I'll fill in some of the more specific details from Fender's website. So they say that it has a custom spec split coil pickup, which are custom spec single coil Mustang bass pickups voiced as closely to JMJ's original vintage bass. And so it is also labeled as a JMJ road-worn Mustang Daphne Blue lacquer finish. It has a 30-inch scale, and it is comes with vintage style hardware, aged pearl pickguard, hip shot lollipop tuners, 9.5-inch radius fingerboard with rolled edges, vintage style bass bridge with single groove saddles. So yeah, go ahead then and tell us what drew you to this model.
Well, you just said a bunch of stuff about it, but for me, it's just cool. It's such
and
a cool
according
bass.
to Fender's website, they also add multiple times on their website that this is a cool bass.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's got a cool color. It's got cool road-worn features.
Everything is cool about it. So I had a P bass before this. It's a 2012 American Standard, and for anyone who owns one of those, you know that's like a solid time frame for American P basses. And I love that thing. But I wanted something with more character, and I realized the more that I started recording, the more that I wanted a short scale bass. A lot of my favorite recordings were on short scales, a lot of them on Hofner's, but that's just why I kept getting drawn to short scale. So another band that I got into was the Grays. They had one album in the 90s, and John Bryan was playing bass on that and was playing a Mustang from what I can tell. And I just really wanted that character in the sound. So when this was getting announced, I pre-ordered it point blank. It took like over a year for it to finally show up from when I put the pre-order in, but totally worth it. It's the best like blind purchase of a guitar I've ever made. This thing is so solid. That's
been a theme for you, because so far we've had episodes with you doing the Chompy and the Harmony guitar, and each of those have been blind purchases.
Never try them.
You know what? You're seeing the cool instruments and you're just swooping them up.
There you go.
Said that when you bought this, it was $999?
Yeah, I bought this, and at the time it was $9.99, and you can't find a like actual '66 Mustang for less than like $4,000 or $5,000. So the fact that you could get one that sounds and feels and looks identical to something like that is great. Fender had some other Mustangs, but they were the like P Jazz combo pickup thing, which I wasn't really a fan of. This is just like straight up a Mustang bass, and it sounds great.
What drew you to Beck's music in general? Because when I hear Justin Meldal Johnsen's credits, it makes a lot of sense that you would be drawn to similar gear, because I could see similar musical influences for your project Boosk. So it's kind of like alternative sound, but how would you describe Beck's sonic palette over the years that you particularly are drawn to?
I don't know that there's a specific thing. It's all over the place. I think he's known for that. And JMJ as a bass player, I think is known for that too. Like he's not known for playing one bass or having one sound. And I think that's what I like too. I'm pretty scatterbrained. So to find music that's as scatterbrained as I am, I think I'm drawn to that.
Nice. Do you want to play, before we were filming, you were saying that Losing Sleep from your new album has a very good riff that displays what this bass does. Do you want to just play it for us?
Yeah. Losing Sleep, the bass is the main thing in that song. It's
yeah,
that's a riff.
It's a great riff. And we were watching Justin Meldal Johnsen's YouTube video announcement for the instrument, and he said that it's like a heat-seeking rocket or something like that.
It cuts in the mix.
It cuts in the mix. And you asked me, is that true? Because I've been mixing this bass for a couple of years now, from Boosk to the Margots to rather than the Roxies. And my answer, I'm going to just ignore the heat-seeking rocket part, because what I see is it's mid-rangey and it's warm and it's punchy. Mm-hmm. And over the years, you would send me stuff and I would do too much to it. And I realized that you like the sound of it with just a vintage limiter, just limiting, which also happens to be what I like to do with kick and snare. So often on the Boosk tracks for this album, it's just a vintage limiter on this bass, the kick and the snare, and getting them all to kind of speak to each other. And then to get more color, I'll maybe run the kick and snare through a parallel preamp that's adding dirt. But for the bass, I don't think I really do much anymore, because I feel like we've kind of arrived that you like a drier, punchier, compressed sound, because it already has a natural compression to it. And your riffs on the bass seem to be kind of the bedrock of your song arrangements, because I think of you as bass player first. Is that how you consider yourself, or do you see yourself as a producer more, or a songwriter?
100% bass player first, and then pretending to be everything else. But that's for sure how I would put it, for sure.
Rad. And that seems like, do you think that's kind of your takeaway with Justin Meldal Johnsen, is like kind of bass player turned producer of alternative music? Is that kind of like the vibe?
I don't know if I want to speak for him or anything, but I would say that there's a lot of producers that I look up to who were bass players, like primarily at some other point. So JMJ is one, and then like mentor that I've known for a really long time, and he's worked with Dan for years too. But Tyler Chester, he's someone I met him as a bass player, and he mentored me as a bass player. But he is amazing at everything. Like he can play piano like no other. He can play guitar. He produces really great stuff. And that's what it seems to be the case with JMJ too. So if I could pretend to be like either one of them.
Another one would be John Joseph, right? Didn't he start as bass player as well? So
yeah.
It seems like bass players have a certain vibe, it seems, when it goes to like, because a great bass riff goes a long way. Tame Impala, for instance, like great bass playing on records is a thing that has a lot of value, because it can sit nicely with the drums, it can support everything else, and that in itself is thinking like a producer. So I wonder if there's some kind of like through line of like great bass players who understand great arrangements make great productions. It seems like maybe
probably.
I don't know.
There's a thing that I think Tyler said it to me, or we read it somewhere, but he passed it on to me. Maybe he heard it from somewhere else, but when I was still like trying to figure out how to be a good bass player, he told me like, you have one job, is to make the rest of the band sound better than they actually are. And if you're doing that, people are going to want to play with you. And that altered the way I was thinking about playing bass, because it's not about like making a cool bass line for the sake of it. It's a bass line that suits the vocals and makes them sound better and like highlights what they're doing, but then it's also locked in with the drums. And if the drummer's loose and you're locked in with them, so you have to pay close attention to everything. So when I'm playing live, I'm hyper focused on the space in between notes, like the kick and the snare. I'm not really listening to those. I'm listening to like the space in between them and like, where do I fit in with that? So I think from years of doing that, it forces you to hear songs more holistically. And that can translate into production, because now when I'm making songs for myself, the bass is still like the closest instrument to me. So it's going to take more of the forefront, but the rest of the song is going to be structured around it.
When you got this bass, you'd mentioned that you made alterations to it. What are some of the changes you made to get the sound that you have today with it?
Yeah, this bass is almost stock. When they shipped it out, like to get it at the price point, you can tell really quickly which corners were cut. And the first one was the nut. I took it to Rick. We talked about him when we were talking about my harmony. Rick in Brea is great. He switched out for a bone nut. So that's one thing. The strings that came on it were weird.
What is the difference in sound, or what do you gain by switching the nut?
Somebody could probably tell you a tonal difference, but I can't. All I can tell you is the one that was on there looked off. It was like just pure white plastic, and everything else is like kind of faded looking. And then on top of that, it was way too high, so it needed to get filed down anyways because the action was off. So in the sense of, I'm going to take it to get a setup for sure. That was the other thing. Like, they didn't send it with a setup. The saddle was just perfectly flat. Like, nothing was intonated. The strings on it were really weird and had crazy overtones. So those are the first things that I took it to get it set up, switched out the nut so the action would be right. And then having a bone nut, somebody could probably tell you what the benefits are besides the action just being right. But feels great now.
It's also fun to say bone nut.
I guess it is. I don't say it that much. But that's it. Other than that, the pickups are the same pickups. The other thing, the thumb rest. In the 60s, these things were on this side, and I think the idea was that you would like grab it and play with your thumb. But people would switch it to the other side over here so that you could have a thumb rest. I rest my thumb on the neck when I'm playing that way, so it was just getting in the way. So I took it off and put it back where it was supposed to go originally. And there were already holes there, so and then part of their road-worn thing was to leave the holes. Yeah.
It has these really tiny looking pickups. Is that standard for a Mustang bass? Like, I've never noticed how small those pickups are.
Yeah, that's a standard Mustang bass thing, is these little split single coils, not as chunky as a P bass.
And what does that do for the sound? Like, what... Besides it looking cool, was there a sonic thing that you were drawn to with Mustang basses as opposed to P basses? And does that have some connection to the differences in the basses themselves?
They're really similar. If I had to describe it, a P bass is solid and maybe has a little more like low to it. But the notes are solid, like just they're there. This thing has a lot of character. There's like, especially with the flat wounds on it, it's got a woodier tone and like those mids can come out more. But it's also like some of the character comes from being short scale, and like the notes aren't as, I don't know what else to say besides solid. Like they kind of wobble a little bit more. You got to be careful. Like if you're pressing too hard or digging in too much, you can like change the pitch a little bit. But that adds to the character for sure.
Yeah. Okay. What kind of pedals do you find yourself using in the studio or even live with this bass?
For the most part, it's just straight up the bass. Most of the live stuff I would do, I'd play it just straight into a DI, and sound guys everywhere are just like, whoa, that thing sounds great. I don't have to touch it. Like the same way that you're saying when you're mixing it, it's like a little bit of compression or a limiter and you're done. Same with like live sound guys love this thing because you just plug it in and it sounds great. But for pedals for fun, I think if you listen through like the Boosk album, you're going to hear some overdrive on it. There's some fuzz here and there. And
what kind of overdrive do you use?
Oh man, we're just like but I have what pedal am I don't think I'm using a pedal for overdrive. I think we're just cranking up the preamps on all the stuff that we've done so far. There's not even an overdrive. I have a fuzz pedal from Tysco that I use on a couple of the songs. And then another thing we were doing is we were adding like a slapback almost delay on some of them. So there's a few songs on the record that you'll hear like a subtle delay. Not a lot of repeats or anything, just like a quick slap. Sounds pretty cool.
Are you referring to the Cooper Time Cube stuff that I put on it, or is that something that you put on?
No, it was something you did. Like I sent you dry bass, and it came back with something on it.
That would be either the Ampex tape delay, the Cooper Time Cube, or a Space Echo, something. Yeah. I usually will do that to snare and bass if I want it to sound beachy. Like when you guys are doing like your kind of like talking about that negative space. If I feel a lot of that negative space between the kick and the snare, and it's kind of really dry and crisp, I like to play with the sides of the image processing with some kind of wet tape thing that's quick, just to give it like a spatial roundness, but
I feel like you can hear it a lot on Hello Waves, and I'm pretty sure Losing Sleep has a little bit of it there too.
Yeah. Sick. Yeah. And it's also kind of playing with the idea that the bass is a little bit like a guitar, so I think your Mustang bass fills a little bit both of those roles in a lot of your songs. It's like kind of like the main bass support, but also it's usually doing something that maybe a guitar would do. So you switched out the hardware as far as just the nut, but you haven't changed really anything besides that. And then, like if someone at home wanted to emulate what you're doing on your records as a bass player and they don't have a Mustang, what are some other tools they can use to get closer to this kind of punchy, character-driven sound?
Don't add too much like bass, like low-end frequencies when you're recording stuff. Like try to keep it pretty flat. If you have multiple pickups to choose from, go with the neck and you'll get like a rounder sound. The bridge is going to have like more of a jazz bass kind of punch to it. So if you're trying to get like that woodier sounding, like if you're listening to Paul McCartney or you're listening to like a Tame Impala thing, or a lot of those songs are on a Hofner or some kind of short scale bass that is real thumpy and woody, and flat wound strings are where it's at for that. It'll bring that out if your bass isn't already there. So just try some flat wounds, try the neck pickup, and don't play too hard, like softer hands. You're going to get that tone out too. And
switch out that bone nut.
Maybe. Take it to Rick Graham.
Yeah, take it to Rick and get a new bone nut going. So you don't use any amps with it really, right? Live, you're doing DI in the studio. What preamp are you running your bass through?
I have a Tree Audio branch is what it's called. It's like a big chunky channel strip. It takes like 3 rack spaces, and it's really straightforward. There's a preamp, there's a really simple EQ, and a compression in there. So I just go straight out from that.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, sick. Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for bringing over your JMJ Mustang bass. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in. And Brandon, where can they find you if they want to follow more of the Boosk journey?
You can follow me on Instagram. It's at Boosk Music. And you can, check out the songs. They're coming out on March 29th on all the streaming stuff. So Boosk will have a whole album that you can hear this and a bunch of other noises I made.
Sweet. And you guys can find Ildefonso at ildefonso.co or on Instagram and Twitter at Ildefonso Inc. And we will see you next time. Bye.